Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şurah li sadri ve yessir li emri ve hlul ukdeden min lisani yefkahu kavli. Selamünaleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuh. So today we don't have text. Actually, there are some texts that we can maybe recommend. The Tabiat Risalesi. We can recommend the text maybe later. But a few weeks ago, based on some recommendations, suggestions, asks by Qadir, was it you?
Maybe.
Yeah. We decided to study a topic that we usually don't study, which is evolution. But as expected, we are not planning to study it from a scientific perspective or even from many other perspectives, but only from a perspective that relates to Iman, belief. So we are not planning to study the topic itself. What I mean is, like, we're not planning to study how people study it, whether there are some conflicts or not, whether there are some contradictory, the ideas within this topic or not. This is not our job. This is their experts, right? If people studying it as a profession, if they want to make the domain better, it's their job, not us. So we wanted to study it because it seems, for certain reasons, and inshallah we will try to understand these certain reasons, it seems that this topic, especially nowadays, the idea of evolution is put as a rival to certain ideas that we study here in this circle. And for that reason, we see people, bring up some questions fueled by, their understanding or their practices in this domain, the evolution. And there seems to be some the questions in people's mind, how, people say there, let's say the people studying evolution, what they say and so on, how it fits to what we study here. Or maybe in another way, if what they say is true, how what we study here makes sense, how it is true as well. Before maybe going into too deep, maybe we should start asking the question, why do you think, especially nowadays, in our society, in our age, there's a rivalry. How we say? Rivalry. Yes. Like we see, for instance, people trying to push the idea of evolution or study of evolution into primary schools. Right? They are trying to force the school districts to teach it in primary schools. And of course, a question comes to mind, why? Like, why they don't push, for instance, the study of thermodynamics, but evolution? Why people not trying to make people understand better, let's say, the electronics, but the biology? There are such questions, of course. And at the same time, on the other side, it seems if you, I don't want to use identify because it goes back to this, the identity, the politics. But if you call yourself as a believer, whenever the idea of evolution comes, there's this feeling of insecurity. And I'm just trying to be honest. Insecurity, or at best, maybe some questions in minds. So interesting enough, and I will explain why I find it interesting, maybe later. But when we talk about, let's say, some physical laws or physical, let's say, studies like Newton dynamics or the laws of motions, nobody cares. Like from a believer, the camp, within the believer's camp, if I talk about some equations about the motion of things, it wouldn't shake your belief, it seems. But when somebody starts talking about the statistics of genetic mutations, or how certain features are inherited from one, the parent to the child and so on, for some reason this belief starts to be shaken. So let's try to understand maybe this part first. Why do you think it's problematic? Why do you feel insecure? I mean, you don't have to say that I feel insecure. I already know that all of you feel insecure, so don't worry, including myself. So why do we feel this way? Why do you think others, push it too hard? Why do you think people, let's say, from an unbelief perspective, why do you think the people hold on the evolution so hard, as if it will destroy the belief, destroy the religion? Let's start from there, maybe from this psychological, the landscape. Let's try to see where we stand, where you stand. So let's start with, the initial ideas about this topic. Why do you think it is different than, again, physics? Or is it different than physics? Let's start from there. Who has the microphone? Okay, let's start from you.
I guess one thing that comes to mind about evolution compared to like maybe other other fields of science like physics is that you can't really, it's a principle that you can't really like measure. Like even with like laws of physics, like you have certain rules and equations that maybe can demonstrate, you can say that from like a belief perspective that this is still like representative of the order that is in the universe. But when it comes to evolution, I think that principle brings in this element of like randomness and chaos, like new like organisms and species are coming out by themselves based on like random mutations in someone's genetic code, and that randomness is like probably opposite to what we would expect of like an ordered system. And so maybe that is one possible reason why we have such a difficult time with like evolution. Like even if we have all these theories and like proposed evidences, it's hard to connect things together just because it's like also like a really big time scale between when a certain change is supposed to happen.
So randomness versus order.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing maybe we should keep in mind, as I said, like we are not trying to, let's say, criticize the way people study it. Okay? So it's not our job. So let's assume when we, study this, we should assume the best for evolution. What I mean, let's assume the field of study has very clear equations. Let's assume that these equations are working. Let's assume that whatever they claim as a, the observational, the thing, let's assume we can observe it in laboratories. As certain as gravity? As certain as gravity. So we have to start with this assumption. Otherwise, it would become, the gossiping the certain scientists and so on. This is not our job.
My
But
bad.
the order versus the chaos, or order versus randomness, is, I think, very important point.
My bad. I let some of my bias get in there.
Yes.
I guess the reason why I think we care so much about evolution is because we have Quran that's telling us the beginning. We have evolution that's supposedly also telling us the beginning.
Beginning of what? Sorry.
Life,
Okay.
humans, whatever you want to think, whatever you think is first, at least, that we are given some sort of structure about how humans came on to this world, let's say. And evolution is telling us, like, I actually know also how you came onto this world and how you became to where you are right now. I can even tell you the structure that makes you how you became. I can tell you the steps and such. So I think that's like the biggest appeal, is that one is defining life and then the other is also defining life. So you have to choose which one sounds more convincing to you. And if you, maybe one is more convincing than the other, but I think that's a topic for discussion.
Alhamdulillah. Great point. You want to say something, or do you want to say something since you are closer to the microphone?
So I would assume we're just talking about how evolution kind of, we think, contradicts with our faith, or like makes our faith kind of shaky. That's what we're
Yes.
okay.
Let's start from there.
Yeah, so I think what Rartu said, like, as Muslims or whatever, as Muslims or even Christians or something, we're supposed to believe that Adam was the first human, and that was like, I don't know, 10,000 years ago or something, while according to evolution and other, like, fossil records, and so life on Earth goes way, way before than 10,000 years ago. So that's...
So who says 10,000 years ago again? Sorry.
I don't know, some some hadith or...
Okay, biblical, the Christian.
Muslims don't believe that? I don't know.
I'm just asking, like, it's the personal thing, right? You either believe or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
It doesn't come with an identity, so.
Okay. Well, anyways, like Adam was the first human.
Okay.
And God taught Adam, everything, how to plant and the words and whatever. When, like, I thought, I don't know. I mean, that we think that, there were humans before that were like hunters, and I'm not talking about evolution, but like this is kind of evolution too, like from, there were before, like there were hunters and gatherers, and at some point humans started to domesticate plants and animals and stuff. Like they learned that on, on stages, and it wasn't like one human who was taught how to plant and how to, grow things and stuff, and taught it to everyone else in the...
There was no teaching, but there was only learning.
Exactly.
By yourself.
Yeah, and not by one human, but by a group of humans that for some reason, I mean, there are different reasons why people started to settle. One of them is because even people believe that because they wanted to worship, they started like building on kind of temples or so, and they settled around their temples, and that's how also they started farming and so. But anyways, the idea is that it didn't start by one human who planted things, or like who was taught how to plant and domesticate animals, and then he taught it to everyone else. So that's one thing. Another thing, I feel like for me, it's now we have, let's say, I don't know how many breeds of dogs, right? And we have wild dogs and domesticated dogs. And without evolution, I would say that God has created every single breed of these dogs. But it's easier to believe that at some point there was a wild dog, and humans domesticated this dog, and through like generations and different like environments and whatever, like there were like different breeds of dogs that evolved, from like this kind of breed of dog, like the changes in the fur and the whatever and the size or something like that. And that applies to other animals too.
I see. So what would be the Quranic alternative to that?
What is the Quranic alternative? That God created every kind of or every breed or every...
Okay, so
or
you mean
maybe there's no...
So I'm just trying to understand. When you say God created, do you mean
Or
way
creates.
back, once upon a time, God created all these different types of dog, and then they have to stay same. Otherwise, it's not God creating them. Is that what you mean?
So that's a good point. I don't know what Islam says about this, to be honest. But like, so that's, they don't stay the same. And the fact, and even believing that they don't stay the same, and because their DNA is changing, they are changing. I don't think that contradicts, according to me. I don't know. I don't think that contradicts with Islam. But I don't.
No, I'm
That's why
asking
you're
just
here. I
yeah,
don't know.
okay, yeah.
I don't know what Islam says about this, but yeah, that's my point. Like, you know, like, or maybe this is what like the biblical belief is, that, you know, like, because, you know, Darwin came against the biblical belief where they were like just like kind of looking at observing species and naming them. It was mostly taxonomy and believing that, you know, every breed or every species was like created the way it is by God. So maybe that's why we're always comparing the Darwinian to this kind of like biblical
I see.
theology or whatever. But I'm not sure what Islam says about this. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to be honest.
Maybe we should clarify one thing. When it comes to such contemporary, let's say, the topics, this is my personal belief that we shouldn't think that Islam says something. It's scholars say something. So what I mean,
Islam is not a human being, right? They're talking in the
that's
name
exactly
of.
what I mean. Like, but when you say Islam, the Quran gives you basics, like the building blocks of everything. How you put them and make interpretations and so on, it's the scholarly thing. It's not like you shouldn't attribute such ideas, whatever they are, to Islam, but to certain scholars. You should say, these and that scholar thinks this way or that way. Unless, you know, we know that the Prophet made certain interpretation. Unless this is the fact, whatever you say, the Islam thinks this way, or it's some scholars think certain ways.
So then, according to some scholars, Adam wasn't the first human on earth, like the first human that God created. So in the Quran, is when God wanted to create humans, then the angels asked, "Why do you want to create someone who will be corrupt and shed blood or something?" Yes, something like that, right? Yes, we could demand or something. Yeah, and then the question was, so how did the angels know that the humans will be corrupt and they will shed blood? So the answer to this was, according to some scholars, is that before Adam, there were other, like, you know, worlds and other Adams and other humans. But yeah, so some scholars do say that.
Anyone else who close the microphone? Otherwise, oh yeah, please.
So was the original question about like why we give so much significance, or not just we as in like anyone gives significance to the question of evolution? Well, along that line, I was thinking of initially what Durartu said about there seems to be, at least in terms of how, now I have to be careful because we're getting direct interrogations, you know. So there seems to be certain interpretations that say, you know, okay, like there is a certain very established Quranic view of origins of life, of existence, right? And then this seems to be a sort of distinct view that opposes that. But also, I guess like the question of evolution, or even of just natural selection, I don't know if we put them under the same umbrella here. It's completely related also to the question of what values do we have as human beings, both innately or formatively? What are we meant to do? How are we meant to, you know, have relations with each other? So it's not just even a question of like who created this or how did this come into being, but what is a virtuous act? What is not a virtuous act? What is normal? Or why do I like this beautiful tree? Why do I not like this thing? Like, it also seeks to answer questions of how I give value, enjoy things, experience life, basically. And I think that is a very determinative you know, issue.
Yeah, from
But also, you know, you were saying I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. You were saying like, why are they concerned about not teaching thermodynamics, but they're trying to teach evolution, or they're trying to force evolution into the system? I mean, they're not trying to force evolution into the system. It's already in the system.
Yeah.
Let's pass that. They
That's an
teach
outdated
thermodynamics
question, yes.
and also evolution. Like it's not a question anymore. We lost that battle, or whoever we is.
Now it's your turn. You waited too long.
I just wanted to point out like how it is very same on the basic like physics and evolution. If you were going to look at it like from a basic point of view, like both of them are laws that have been made by humans by observing what is around them. So I think both of them at the very core are very similar, but why evolution is so important to us humans, like we pay attention to it, is because it gives us an answer to our existence, how we came to be. And I think that is a very important question for every human being. And evolution supposedly answers that question.
Alhamdulillah. Anyone else? Who? Oh, you.
I guess one thing that I was thinking of, like, yes, evolution, like, I think both provide an answer to existence, right? Like, both evolution and, like, both, like the Quranic, like, iman, from an iman sense, it also provides an answer. But I guess it's maybe thinking of why are we tending towards evolution as being, like, the answer, as maybe, like, current society like tends to prefer that answer, or for some reason thinks that that answer is what sort of resonates. And I think it also may have something to do with like that like theory providing, like, allowing us to have some sort of like ownership over the things that are happening in our lives. So I guess what I just came from like a talk actually that was, I won't go into the technicalities, but it was talking about like there was some evolution like talk involved at a very small like cellular level. And the talk was about like, oh, this is what evolution has done, and it's like randomness, but there does seem to be a pattern. So let's exploit that pattern and like try to manipulate it to our like to our own like devices, and like create some sort of therapeutic from what we understand from evolution. And so I think that like the idea that, you know, evolution is just this like random process, random, but like also has certain patterns and laws that we can follow, and that we can also ourselves directly like manipulate things. I guess this is more from like a scientific perspective that Sarah was talking about earlier, about like breeding plants and stuff to create specific, like using certain rules. What? Wait, what?
Atat astaghfirullah.
I'm sorry. It's just an example. But anyway, like just basically manipulating things ourselves and like having some sort of ownership over natural processes.
Alhamdulillah, great
Yeah.
point. Yeah. So we can rule the nature, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea.
Yeah.
If you learn how it works, we can rule it. Yeah.
I just wanted to give some historical context as to why like evolution might have gotten the importance that it does. And I think a lot of it had to do with the failings of the Bible and how it was written incorrectly in many ways, and how it was the additions that were made to it, and also the Christian church, which was very much like pushing these ideas down people's throats, right? Basically, you had all these ideas of how, like, you know, the earth is at the center, the humans are the best, you know, and everything else is just coming secondary. So then you started, through physics, through people researching, you started having these things being contradicted. So people, you know, realize that the earth is not at the center of the universe, you know, we're orbiting the sun. So all of a sudden, these things started to fall apart, right? And the church was very much, you know, like very against this idea. They hung some guy, they were going to execute Galileo. Galileo apologized, the whole thing happened, right? So now, what was the last thread in people's life? Like all these things that the Bible is saying, Noah's Ark, you're seeing some species like in Australia that's being discovered. Why isn't it here if Noah's Ark landed here? So those sort of ideas. So everything's falling apart. What is the one thing that is left in people's life? Who created people, right? So this was the final thread in their belief, right? So this guy comes, Darwin, and he's like, okay, like he starts to see these causes, right? He's like, okay, I'm seeing these connections, and the conclusion that I'm reaching is it's nature. And people very much started to really like fight the church on this idea because they were so tired of the church. And it is actually a myth that evolution became this huge thing, because it did not become this huge thing. Actually, the person who, sorry, I did a paper on this recently. The person who found out evolution along with Darwin, he actually started believing in God more, because to him, that was evidence that life forms are going to evolve into something bigger after death. So it's a whole myth, right? Like causes, we've already discussed that. I honestly don't know why we're still having this discussion. Like, yeah, if you have dogs that are domesticated, like sure, yeah, somebody domesticated a dog, and because of that, we now have all these like meek dogs, whatever. Who's to say God isn't behind that still? Like causes aren't effects. That's what we've been talking about. So like, I just don't understand why we're having this discussion.
Jazakallah khairan. Yeah. No, you go please. Anger. Is
I know. I'm like, I don't know how to
anger
back that
is
up,
the
but
sign of instability. Don't forget that.
oh man. Oh, okay. Let's hope I don't have anger again.
Down.
I know. I think the main question I keep having is that in evolution, there's some sort of time given. And I think
What given?
timeline,
Okay,
some
yeah,
sort of
okay.
timeline. We say like billion years, whatever years, but there's some sort of timeline given, even if it's like discovery of bones. So we're like, all right, let's measure everything and see. But we also know that time is arbitrary, something we made up to kind of make sense of our day. So like, I guess I'm having a hard time. I know you said not to compare, and I'm trying not to compare. So, but I think what seems attractive, at least, is like one is kind of giving this definite time that we are so attracted to, because it's like a way of structuring, at least for me, it's like a way of specifically structuring my day or doing something at a specific time. But ultimately, if I really think about time, like it's made up as a so I guess maybe that's one appeal I see. And so I kind of want to discuss, like, is there time in Quran that I'm just not recognizing? Because like we talked about like the story of Adam alayhi salam, but somebody just said no, that's not time. Like I saw somebody shaking their head when you mentioned a
10,000.
date.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned a date, the other person was like, so I just want to know, I guess, like I don't have enough knowledge, so I would like to hear maybe if somebody who knows about a scholar that knows the date. But yeah.
The timeline of Adam, do we have any such Quranic timeline? Oh, he has
Oh.
some.
Sorry, I just need to collect once again. Oh, so the idea here is not whether we believe in evolution or we believe in God. I don't think that's what we're discussing here. We're discussing whether, you know, like you can believe in evolution and believe in God. Like we're not saying that if there is no evolution, if there is evolution, there's no God, you know? Like for what I would think is like, of course God is making everything evolve. That's like the point I was trying to raise.
Making everything evolve.
Like he would, of
Okay.
course he's doing it. Not by itself. That's not. I know, like what the we talked about it before. Like when people say natural selection and evolution and stuff, they are giving this like nature is doing this by itself. But we're talking here about Muslims believing in this, right? So I was talking about me as a person. Of course, like, can I believe in evolution and believe at the same time that God is has done this and is doing this at every time? And looking at looking at dogs being domesticated is kind of like a short period of evolution. So it does make sense. When you believe that this, breed is becoming another breed because of its DNA is changing and creating new traits, that's evolution. That's not
DNA
like,
creating new traits.
well,
I'm just trying to understand, really, like there's not criticism.
no, I mean a change of DNA, because like you have to talk about it from a molecular level. Otherwise, it doesn't make
yeah.
sense. That's why I brought domestication, because I don't want to go back million years ago.
No, I totally agree.
Because we can manifest it now that there is a change in the DNA. God is causing the change. That's not the discussion, but like the idea is that there is a change, and this change is causing, a change in a trait, a color, change in like the fur, the size, the whatever, so that's a kind of like evolution. That's why I mentioned domestication, right?
yeah.
Like you cannot study this domestication without going back to the idea of evolution, how like a species can change from one form to another, right? So I mean, I don't know why people are angry, but like that's
No, nobody was angry. So it was I apologize. I was just joking. Nobody is angry.
like also, I just have one point. I don't like to discuss things as if people, made this theory just because they were against the religion or church.
Exactly.
Like it's
Yeah,
all
it's not our job.
conspiracy theory, Like the guy went somewhere in Latin America and he saw like different kinds of birds that had different, like they looked similar, but they had small changes in their size of beaks and whatever. He saw so many species and animals and stuff that they did not have in Great Britain, whatever, at that time. And he had this idea, oh, maybe they, these came from like one similar bird, but because of different environmental causes and stuff. I don't think I don't know what the intentions of now politicians or policy makers or people who put the curriculum and stuff, but I don't think, like the people who started like Darwin or whatever were like, their intention was like, oh, we want to be against the church, and that's why let's make a new theory of creation. I don't like this.
To be honest, like I don't care at all. Like it's like whether he was thinking this way or that way doesn't change anything.
Yeah, I mean, doubting the intentions of the people doesn't change anything.
Let's come back to our intentions. And,
yes.
Yeah, how and why we perceive things in certain ways. So what I got from your talk is you are saying that I don't have difficulty. What is the word concept? Making them agree. Reconciling, yes. Reconciling thing to thing, because you say, as an one alternative, maybe one possibility, you're saying that I can believe that the God causes a change in DNA, and then this change causes the trait changes and so on. By the will of God, God allows the DNA to create such a change in trait. Okay, that's what I understand from what. Okay, alhamdulillah. Let's go with Yusuf.
So I was just going to say that alhamdulillah, brothers have no question.
They're so good in Iman. Yes, alhamdulillah.
So brothers are so pious. I don't know what's wrong with sister.
Brothers are not biologists.
So yes, that might be another issue. Yeah, but alhamdulillah. So I just wanted to say that.
Oh, that's it.
And as a maybe it's a question which I guess we'll study eventually. But one of the main reasons we had this discussion was that question, like after months or maybe years of studying causality and related topics, somewhat in those discussions, our conclusion converged to the point that, in a sense, creation, every moment is being created by the creator. Like the previous moment is not creating the next moment. Or put in a different way, previous moment does not give birth to the next moment. Or put in another word again, God does not create the next moment from the previous moment. So this was sort of the idea. Now, there's this question being posed in this way, generally. now we are changing the domain. Like this is how we have been studying for months. But now the question becomes in a different domain, out of the blue. Now I am observing, let's say, species. Why is it not that, or is there any contradiction that God creates species through evolution? Is becoming the question. And this is the reason we are having this discussion, because it looks like we are not able to reconcile the two in our head. Like one, whatever we observed in moment by moment basis, there, this moment's presence of a particle versus next moment presence of the same particle, we say they are independently being created by the same creator. One is not evolving, changing, emerging, whatever word you use from the previous one. We are now asking the same question for a monkey, a human, or I don't know, whatever you name it. Does it apply to that or not? Or what would be wrong for me to say that, well, it is God creating, but creating through evolution. So this is mainly the question. I think it's a legitimate question because some concept that we concluded in one part of our life, how do I apply to another part of my life? Because as we have been talking about the continuous creation, let's put it this way, mostly we were talking about, let's say, particles, thermodynamics or physics and whatnot. But when it comes to now biology, where a totally different framework is at play, apparently, or maybe not totally different, but we think it's different. Another theory is there, another model is there, which is evolution. And now my conclusion is being that, well, in the other domain of particles and whatnot, I concluded after months of discussion, God is creating every moment. Now I would like to borrow this idea of God is creating everything and apply it to this domain of evolution, but not going as detailed now. I'm just saying that, oh, he is creating through evolution, and what's wrong saying such a thing? So is it a proper attitude, for example, to say it like this is really where we started this conversation from. So, and I think this is a very important question to ask in this sense, because you can extrapolate it. You can also say that I was super sad for the past 3 years, hence I became so ambitious, hence I am successful today. My emotions are now evolving, and I define a causal relationship between my emotions and today's success is because of yesterday's sadness plus my resilience. So it's not only a matter of really evolution, but you can apply it to many domains. So it becomes necessary how Tawheed is applying to multiple facets of life, also multiple facets of science, if you like.
And I should add, especially for gentlemen. So just assuming that I already don't believe such things. I don't believe in evolution. I don't care. Such an attitude is, I don't think, taking us anywhere. We have to be, you want to say something?
A very tiny comment.
Yeah.
So at Drexel, since the beginning of the year, now we are like 5 months, right? In our discussions, I was begging to students to ask questions. We even made a form, Google Doc, so that people can anonymously ask questions. And a few people are uploading the questions. I can notice from the structure of the question that it's coming from the same few people. So people are not asking questions. Today, we tried something different. Dua was suggesting it last week. Today's topic was questions that your non-Muslim friends are asking. There was a flood of questions. Very good questions. People were very open. So, but the thing is, it's your non-Muslim friend's question, and you didn't have an answer. This is why you are asking it here. But the student is not saying, oh, it's not my question. I'm not asking it. My friend is asking. Because the idea is, if I ask it, then that means I would be doubting. That means I am going to hellfire. I better not die before finding an answer. So I'm not going to take it for myself. So Brothers don't have questions. Yes.
So, no, like, especially when it comes to such topics, that's the reason I'm insisting that we are not studying the techniques of it or the details, the scientific details of it. Whether you are studying it or not, it is highly relevant because it affects your life and the lives of next generations. So, for instance, for today's age, we do not question anything that we learned in physics. We all inherently believe whatever they taught us. Everybody in this room believe the laws of motion. When I push it, everybody believes that it moves with a certain speed because I push it. There's no question there. Just because we are not studying physics, it doesn't mean that it's something we don't believe. So why should I study? It's already there in your life. And this is what you are teaching your children as well, right? And it is affecting, actually destroying the belief. When you take all these things out of the belief, what remains is, I am praying, I am fasting, what else I can do? Right? This is what remains as belief. Just a few prayers, a few zikr, and nothing more. The rest of the life will live according to laws of shirk. That's how we live our lives.
Can you open it up a little bit? This sounds very fundamentalist.
Oh yeah, now I understand. Yeah. We have no, for instance, the difficulty of believing, right? The things move because of the laws of gravity. Things feel cold because of lack of energy, right? So we have no problem believing such things. But Quranic teaching tells us every moment there is no, the single leaf falling down, which is not created moment by moment by the Creator. This is what Quran says. But they taught us that no, the leaf falls down because of gravity, the wind, whatever, all this interaction of different forces. So we have no difficulty believing that. So it doesn't mean, we studied it and, understood it and so on and so forth, but we learned it this way from the primary school. And we make it like we internalize it so much when somebody like this guy who seems very fundamentalist, he says, no, everything is created by God. We start, smiling. So he obviously doesn't know certain physical laws, right? This is our default attitude right now. So we lost this battle already. So now people are talking about the certain laws or theorems or whatever in biology as well, right? The evolution, for instance. Some of us, we just afraid. We say, I don't believe such things. Some other people says, oh no, actually I believe them. There is no, the contradiction with the religion and so on and so forth.
There's a nicer version. Can I?
Yeah, please.
It's perfectly fine. Like evolution is perfectly fine. We can accept it, except
man.
Monkeys and everything else, yes, they are perfectly fine and in line with Quranic teaching. But when it comes to human was created. So, and this was.
Yep. We have all these alternatives. But what happens? That's the important thing. What happens as time goes? We start internalizing such things as well. So within the realm of biology, life, Now there are rules, there are laws, and we will accept them just like we accepted the laws of motion. And then next moment, we will realize that, I mean, if everything is governed by God, the laws, including our lives, how I act, how I decide, and so on, really, like, there is no place for God. So this is relevant to everybody. And we cannot simply, again, have a stance saying that, oh, I'm a Muslim, I don't believe such stuff. If you believe laws of motion, that means you will believe in laws of biology as well. There's no reason not to believe them. Maybe not today, but tomorrow you will believe. If not, your children will believe. There's a guarantee there. So it is relevant. Again, the idea is not studying these laws. The idea is not studying, the details of these, the theorems or whatever. The idea is how we accept them, what we do with them. Please, sorry for making you wait.
I guess like if in both cases, so for example, you said like if we accept this idea that like things are being created and that's what it's how we said, and in evolution, this idea that like we are observing some sort of association. And we can't really prove causality. We can't say something causes that thing for sure because we can't go back to that time and be like, yep, that was definitely it. And so there's no way to prove that. But there's a way to say, oh, at least like here's 90% of this seems to be caused by this thing, let's say. But I think like when we come back now to like religion, I also feel the same way. There's a faith I have to have at one point. Like, can I really prove? Because there's at least like me, I'm like, to what point can I prove? Because there's nothing. If today I woke up and I'm like, I saw a leaf fall, like you said, I had this fundamental idea based on what I learned that, oh, it's gravity, right? So now I have to like recreate and say things are being created at one point and associated to a new thing. Like, so I guess like, isn't it still just using a different framework to understand the world? Because like one was also trying to understand the world because of observations. They saw some sort of association, even if it's high degree, sometimes it's not that much, but they saw something and they started believing in that framework. Now, religion is also saying you will observe those things, but association is different. Like what you, I guess, believe is the cause ultimately is different. But you can't verify actually both of this, is the question. But
I have a question because when you talk about physical laws, for example, are we taught? I studied physics in school. When we say like, are we learning that gravity is causing, or are we just observing something over and over that we kind of associate a sense of like predictability to it? So we're not saying gravity is causing this, but we observe something, a force, and we call it gravity, and we associate equations with it, which give us some sense of predictability of what comes next. We don't know what causes it, but this is how we observe. It's just equations are just putting it into like what we're seeing into a mathematical form. It's not saying one is causing, like these equations are what is causing it. They're just representing what we observe into like mathematical or into written form is how I see it. So then can we, with that understanding, as long as we separate, like, because our equations are not the ones causing it, but we can still use the equations to, like, I guess I'm repeating myself, kind of observe or communicate what we are observing. And then can we not say this is an order that we see that Allah has created, and this is a way we interpret that order, at least from our current understanding? In that way, I don't see like the two being like contradictory, Because they're not saying, like, when you're teaching science or teaching physics, for example, if you're saying, yeah, gravity causes it, or gravity, this is happening because of gravity, then that's actually not scientific either, because you can't prove that this is the cause. It's just a way you observe it, and you're teaching what you observe. And you're saying, if you go out and you test it for yourself, you'll see it, because it happens enough times. And one of my professors, he was saying how even the idea of a theory, it's, you first need a falsifiable hypothesis, something you can prove to be wrong. And that's the basis of science, right? You need to, every hypothesis, you also have a null hypothesis. And a theory is when the null, you fail to reject the null, or fail to reject the hypothesis enough times that it starts becoming a theory. And we were discussing this last time. You start to accept it as a theory because it's so predictable. But when it comes to evolution, it's not a falsifiable theory that this is all happening by chance. Or but the part that I struggle with is when you see a lot of similarities, instead of people viewing that as a as coming from or the unity existing because it's created, it's put there by the creator, or it's being created by the creator, people tend to infer that there is a connection because one should come from the other. And is it just, I often wonder, like, where are we going wrong, or where are we differing? Because is it the inference? Because we do have like certain fossil records, and you can infer things from, and you can only infer things from what you have, right? So I guess when we talk about evolution, like you were saying, it's how we think, how we approach it, as opposed to like the details of, did this happen, because the details we can't verify. But then the inferences, we can compare and say, why is one inference plausible? Why is the other not plausible? That's kind of my understanding. And I still don't know where like
Let me ask you a simple question, if you don't mind. So, what happened? Sorry? Oh, if you don't want, yeah, okay, yeah. So Quran says, for instance, don't you see how we sent down the rain, and then from it bring all this fruitage, the plants and so on. So it means Quran's claim, when you look at the rain and the plants coming out of the earth, it is a evidence, it's a proof that God exists. Not only God exists, but a certain type of God. Like, it's not a God, but the God who is merciful, who has control of everything, over everything, who is knowledgeable, and so on and so forth. Quranic perspective. Quran says when you look at the plants and the rain, you will see nothing but the action of such a God. This is Quran's claim. That's Quran's claim, right? So when you say they don't teach us, this causing that, or the gravity causing this, and so on. When you study it in your classroom, let's say.
depends on the person.
Yeah. I'm just talking in general. When, like, the way we study the plants, the way we study the rain, with the way we study how they move, do we see any evidence, any even indication of a creator there? Or the way it is taught, that it is so natural, like there's no mystery there. The rain comes down with certain speed, mass, and so on. It hits the ground, it causes this, and then they bring some nutrition to plants, whatever. Everything's so clear. Why should I even think about it? I already know how it works. Why I should be concerned about God? Do you think this is the attitude? with
Perhaps.
the, yeah.
Because
So then maybe again, they are teaching us that certain things causing some other things. And then there's no gap for, like, there's no explanatory gap that you can fit something like knowing God or God with a choice. In physics, is there any gap for choice? The will? No, right? If you have a particle with this charge and then another particle with that charge, their movements are certain. The way they will move, the way they will act is certain, right? And
There's a high
when I say
probability.
certain, yeah, I'm not talking about, yeah, in quantum mechanics, there's uncertainties and so, I'm not talking about that. Like, you have these equations, you don't need any choice being made, right? So, but Quran says it is God who creates everything because he wills so. If he wills, right, it happens this way. If he wills, it happens that way. But the way we are taught, there's no such thing as will.
But isn't that because there's a high predictability? Like, for example, with
Does it
fire
matter?
burning.
Again, that's like a technical details, they don't matter, right?
Oh, no, I'm trying to understand where, like, why that attitude tends to take God out of the equation, for example, because it's when we say, when we were discussing the example of a fire burning and how it can be cool for someone that God wishes for it to be cool, because in our day-to-day experiences, because it happens so often, there's a high predictability of this happening. That's the reason why we say this is sufficient, right? Is like for someone who's just observing what is happening and only trying to find God through just that, we know that that should also be leading to one God, right? But then why do people just take that like just associate that effect to the cause and just be satisfied with it? That's a question I have. Like, why are we not questioning further? Is it because we're associating the cause to as like as something that is intentionally leading to the effect? I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Is that what you're saying? I just wanted to be clear.
All I'm saying is the way we are being shaped in the education system, right? It sounds really awkward, let's be honest. It sounds really awkward when, again, this old-minded person, the religious person says, when fire burns, there's a choice there. We say, no, there's no choice. Fire burns, period.
Can someone who doesn't, wait, let me frame this properly. So if we see fire burning all the time, how can we think of the possibility of fire not burning? We know because we know, we believe that God made it cool for Ibrahim alayhi salam. And there's like scientific evidence for like in Imam Nursi's book talking about how at times fire can in really high temperatures be cool, like burn through its coolness or something. But from day-to-day experiences, like someone who doesn't have access to like high tech or like really advanced technology,
Yeah.
or doesn't believe in the narrations that other people might believe in, is there a possibility for them to think about, okay, the fire could not burn in certain instances? If they're only using their day-to-day experience, they're only using their observations, where can they see that there's a choice being made?
A great point. Like maybe a simpler example is when we talk about the fire and so on, it still sounds like too technical. Hence, this gentleman says, I'm not studying the physics, so why I should be discussing the fire? You have a finger, right? I don't know, 5 seconds passed, I still have a finger. Is there a choice there? Like between, I have a finger and then I have another finger after 5 seconds. Is there any choice, or is it just preservation of the matter?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. First there are two, and then you. You were raising your hand. That's the reason. Oh, I didn't see it. Sorry, I apologize. There are two, dua, and
I'm
then.
sorry. I'll just make it really
Yeah.
quick. I guess like if your point, I guess I get where you're coming from because societally, like before this lecture, I'm about to out myself. I was reading a lot on this topic because I was like, yeah, that's how I live my day to day. You're right. You're not wrong in saying like, do I go and every time I see a leaf fall, I'm like, wow, alhamdulillah. No, I'm usually like, okay, like there's some observation I'm seeing. So I think it's easier to, I guess, like see how much of my own like work in my field is how I see the world rather than maybe how I'm trying to see the world. So like I think in that sense, like it's actually easier, it feels like, for me to see it in the way I've been taught for now the last 20 years, however long you've been in school, compared to like the Quranic teaching. So I will say like that definitely easier. And I feel like if it's easier to sit here and argue, but it's actually the opposite comes naturally more to me than Quranic. So I think that's where I see like where you're coming from. But I think also like what's the solution, right? Like I think because for me, Zaha's point is like I'm being taught this thing, but if I put like on the question of the test, I'm like, all right, it's God actually. I'm not gonna get that mark right. So like, how do you work in this wherever you live, but also keep in mind the reality of like, I guess, God. But yeah.
I don't know if I would call, sorry.
Very calm.
I
Alhamdulillah.
I don't know if I would call the education system sinister, because if I think about it, like my parents have not been through that education system. They weren't studying gravity and all the laws like we are. But if I look at how they taught me, yeah, there was an element of God does this. But for the most part, it was also, if you do this, this will happen. And if you do that, that will happen. So I'm wondering, and it is true, causes do seem to be tied to an effect. We are seeing this play in front of us. And I do know that, like if I do this, I'll lift the cup up, So now I'm wondering if, and of course, like it has to be by design. Causes are tied to effects by design. And I'm wondering if then that's the reason why Allah is even mentioning that in the Quran to bring to my attention that no, this thing that you're observing, it is in fact an act. It is a show, and I am the one who is actually behind all of that happening from like every second. So I wouldn't go so far as to be like, oh, we're being trained or whatever. I think I wonder if this is something that we would all fall trap to, regardless of how we were being trained. So, yeah.
Oh,
Hakim, right?
Yaqeen.
Yaqeen, sorry.
I'm very new here, so I think it's really stupid to
Yes,
engage in
yeah.
the conversation, but I think it's okay to
Yes,
be
yes.
stupid sometimes. I want to reiterate something you said that I think is very interesting to make sure I understand correctly. It was when you were talking about the rain, and it seems to me that irrespective of we talk about physics, evolution, psychology, you're saying, are we just looking at what we're looking at, or are we thinking beyond it? What transcend beyond it? Is this what you're trying to point at or not?
So yes. Yeah.
Is this what? Okay.
Yeah.
There is a term in sociology for this by Max Weber, who's one of the founders. It's called word disenchantment, which is, you're familiar with.
Yeah, the idea.
And it's so hard to get out of it. Like it's Yeah, it's I feel it's very interesting what you're pointing at, and it's very hard to de-internalize or be thoughtful in each second in the way you're pointing at. That's very, very interesting. So thank you for clarifying.
Okay. You want to say something and then, oh, Fahim first. I think you were waiting, right? Okay. Fahim and then Qadir. Sorry?
You know, you mentioned the education system is trying to take God out of the picture. But why would you expect them to put God in the picture? Right? Because you have such a big audience who have such a big religious background and non-religious background. So if you just give an idea of God to them, it's going to be biased because you're going to have to pick one religion.
Yep.
So when they're teaching a subject, you can't really expect them to be bring God into the conversation. So now this next question is, if you were teaching, would you teach God first and then explain how these things work? Or would you explain these things, but then, oh, at the end, God makes everything work, right? And let's say your children, you want them to learn about God. Like, how would you, knowing this whole scenario, how would you go about it? Like, after school, you can teach them about God, or let's say during the daytime, you teach them about God, and then you teach them math and science and all that, right? So, like, what's going to be the dynamics they grew up with? What's going to be the more primary, and what's going to be the secondary?
Alhamdulillah, that's it. Such a fundamental questions that especially parents are they're having. I think it deserves a discussion by itself. It's a very important point. Like how you put them together, and we keep complaining about, you know, the education and so on. How would be an ideal education from your perspective? Like complaining is easy, but how you would do it yourself? And what is the right approach? Even for yourself, not only for your children. No, please go
Just
ahead.
a small anecdote for what Zaha was explaining about the language or predictability and whatnot. Well, I believe we mentioned this in the previous discussions as well, but for example, just talking about the predictability of numbers in Middle East for the past 20 years. Very highly likely with 99% predictability that within the next 5 years, they're going to like 1 million plus civilian death within Middle East. Let it be from Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, wherever. So that's sort of a prediction. We do observe a pattern, and based on that observation, we say people die in there. This is the language of many of the newspapers nowadays, actually. People die there. And it's true, people die, but people don't die out of the blue. Like there is somebody who is killing them, but when reporting this observation, you can report it as, no, I'm trying to be objective. With 99% predictability, such people are dying or will die, or they died because of this. This being the attitude of scientific language. So there is an action, something is happening, and saying that, oh, with this probability, or with 99.9 or 100%, let's call it a law, and it keeps happening like this, without mentioning a doer, just talking about the action itself. When it's happening in the Middle East, we take it as an insult for human intellect, right? We said, look, those people are killed by someone. Who killed them is being our question. But when it comes to a certain, if let's say West or some Western country is killing them, they die. But let's say if it is some Eastern or I don't know, Afghanistan or somebody, then such and such killed or made a terrorist attack is being the way that it's being presented. So I would also say that let's be a little vigilant about the use of language in there. It's not as innocent of a language that's going on. So it's not simply reporting a statistical observation. It is intentionally avoiding the discussion of the doer of an action. Whomever is the doer, another question. let's ask that question. But this is not being mentioned in the name of a mythical objectivity. So this, I guess, is another thing to consider in there.
So the mythical objectivity is really important, and it goes back to what Fahim said as well. So, like I heard this argument before. I have a friend teaching at college, and I was asking him whether he was freely expressing his own ideas, the belief, and so on when he teaches. And he said, Birkan, my audience are coming from different cultures. Some of them are Hindu, some of them are Buddhist, some of them are, I don't know, the Christian, some of them atheist, and so on. And I have to speak them in a language that would speak all of them, right? That's what he was saying. And we usually take it as being neutral, the mythical objectivity, the neutral. But if you ask me, there is no neutrality. If you say, like when you teach, for instance, how things move and so on, whatever, or how the financial system works, if you are just talking about how things happen, how we, quote unquote, observe them and start making the connection between them, it is equivalent to say that it happens by itself. There's no need for an external doer. It happens this way. And there's no further explanation. It happens. Or, that's one component pushes another component. It could be a finance system. It could be physics. Doesn't matter. One thing creating another thing. Or it's happening by itself. When you say this, or even imply this, it is not a neutral state. It's an atheist secular state. So we have to be careful. Yet, I'm not saying that we will invade the colleges in US and we will force them teach in Islamic, the tradition. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying, we have to accept that what is there is atheist secular teaching. We have to accept that. When I send my children to the schools, or when I go myself as a researcher, I go to a secular atheist organization, institution. I have to accept that. Otherwise, you will be there. You will not be vigilant. You will close your eyes and they will do whatever they want to you. Not to someone else, but to you. You have to be at least vigilant about that. There's no neutrality. Things either happen by itself or somebody else does it, right? Things either happen based on, due to some causes in the same type of this nature, the universe, which is called naturalism, right? Everything can be explained by natural causes and so on. Either this or not. There's no in between. Doesn't matter, what is written there. You have to be careful what it means.
I just have a question. So
Sure.
just to reiterate what you're
Yeah.
saying. So you're saying if we are explaining how things are happening and taking God, not mentioning the doer, doing that itself is denying the existence of God? Is that what you're saying?
No,
It's as if we are speaking, by saying this is what I observe. You're saying, and I'm not mentioning who is the one who is causing this to happen or causing it to happen this specific way. By not mentioning that, are you saying that's saying that these things are happening by itself?
So when I say, for instance, you will give an example of serial killer. So when I say, when there is such a the input, the stimulus. Neuron fires. Is this an observation or more than that?
To me, it's an observation.
It seems like an observation, right? But I said neuron fires. There is a neuron doing something. So I said the neuron does it. It's not mere observation, is it?
But you're not associating, like, you're not saying the neuron had the intention to fire.
Yeah, you say that there's no such thing as intention. Because there's no need for
I
intention,
don't
because
think we've discussed that. Like when we say neuron fires, for example, we haven't discussed the why that happens. We're just saying
why? No,
what
I'm
hap-
talking about how.
Okay. But why does saying how, why is that more than just an observation? Because you're not associating the capable. Oh, wait.
Because maybe you're not.
I think you're saying the neuron is capable of doing it
Yeah,
on itself.
that's what
you're saying.
well,
right?
that's the assumption. And like, let's not, pretend we haven't been any classrooms. I had a lot of professors, right? And 99% of them would say, just after saying neuron fires, they would say, after billions of years of evolution, neurons became this way to maximize this or that, right? So these are not just hypothetical examples, these are real examples. So in textbooks, for instance, we don't see that people, when they look at two electrons, they see there's no such language, right? In textbooks. It's not about the observations. It's about, what electron does, or what some natural laws, how they act. This is what is written in.
So we're not saying we see this, we're saying they do this.
Yes.
Okay.
Divide.
So
Protein move.
if we don't say that, if we just say,
This is not like a personal, the thing that we are trying to solve. It's like, what I'm saying is, this is what we do in, when we study something.
I
This is
understand
the
that,
default mode.
but we're trying to approach it because we're working in this profession, right? We're doing research. It's the difference only in the language, because the very things we're observing, even if we say, let's say we see electrons moving towards protons, or we see the leaf falling because there's a force of gravity acting on it. From that, we can actually, if we don't intentionally try to remove the observer or remove the doer or whatever, because in science, most of the approaches, like, you have to, even as a scientist, you have to remove yourself from the experiment, right? But there is a limit to how much you can do that. And with quantum physics, we know that there are fundamental limits to what we can measure even. We can kind of scientifically prove that there is a limit to what we can know. But on knowing all of that, if we don't intentionally try to, like, remove the observer or remove the doer, then it should point us to one God, right? That's what Quran is saying. Like, if you observe, if you study, and as researchers, we have the opportunity to study, right? And in more detail. So then this should point us to one God. And I'm confusing.
Yeah, exactly what Quran says as well. It should, yeah.
And I'm confused as to why, if that's the case, where are people, like, missing to see that? Is it just because there's a conscious intention to not see it, to not see the observer, the doer? Is that where we are differing between, between people who do say that God exists and still are engaged in science, scientific work, and people who say, no, God doesn't exist, everything is random? Is that a choice that they're making to not see it?
So we can discuss this again in another discussion, why and so, but going back to our original topic. what I'm saying is most of the people, at least the way I see, most of the people who call themselves as believers, and I'm not saying this as a negative thing, like myself. Most of the people who are believer and still studying the science or making research and so on, and doesn't see any problem there, most of them, or let's say okay, let's make it easier. I don't see a problem there, because what I do when I go to research, like my job, I said, this is not the place for religion. I study it, right? And I do whatever I do. And then outside it, I become a religious person. And this is how I reconcile two things. It's not that, I go to laboratory and I study and my iman becomes bigger and bigger, like a stronger and stronger. It doesn't work that way. I don't see a problem there, because I take it as granted whatever taught to me is already true, and there's no reason to fight against the truth, right? It's already true, and it's not a place for religion. And then, so that's the way how I handle. So not because, I look at the same experiments and I see how God how God does things. It's not the case. Let's be honest. Going back to our original topic. Okay, we are almost end of the time. So maybe the idea, the reason, I ask all these questions, maybe the idea, the reason we have these problems with the evolution and so on, with everything else other than biology, right? The biology, one of the remaining the sciences. With everything else, we don't have any place for God anyway. Everything is so clear, all these equations working, the laws are so certain, you cannot fight against it, right? So who can fight against F equals ma? I'm not talking about the details that it requires some corrections and so on. I'm not talking about that. But everybody knows and accepts that, if there's a mass and acceleration, like the way you drive your car, it's based on equations. You can explain it through equations, right? And you don't need God there. And you are happy with this, because it's not the place for God. It's the daily living, you say. Right? There's only this biology in our hands now, with all these uncertainties and so on. Mystery of life. Yes, that's even better. It's only mystery of life that seems to be out of equations and order, or maybe, let's say, like for God of gaps. Yes, that people cannot explain, and this is the place we find our God, the human life or animal life, doesn't matter. The life, this is where God is for us. When it falls, I don't need God. I mean, I can say as an external thing, oh yeah, God creates it. But there are some equations. That's the reason. This is how it happens. This is how I say. When, if I'm a believer, I insert God as, oh yeah, it happens by these laws, but with God's will. If I extract God from this sentence, nothing changes, really, right? It's still they keep falling. When it comes to life, the mystery of life, though, it's not only about, the beginning of life, the life itself as entirety. This is where God is for us, nowhere else. And some people, how dare they come and say that, you know what, I can find the equation for there as well. I can give you some laws, some theorems that will explain this mystery as well. I will give you some statistical, the interpretations based on genes and so on and so forth. Your precious, the feelings that, can only be explained by God. I will show you that I can explain them through some equations. Now we are frightened. Please.
I think we also. Oh, I guess like we already mentioned earlier, actually, in earlier topic, I think Brother Yusuf gave this example of how we how did those equations come into our mind, right? Like we were born not speaking a language, somehow we're able to speak it, we're able to walk. So like there is knowledge knowledge was acquired from somewhere, some blue moon. At one point, somebody learned it and kind of passed it down. So how is that occurring is also, I think, a good point of question to answer this idea of like, I can provide you with this equation. You can, but somebody at one point couldn't, right? So like, I think that's maybe where there is space for God, even in chemistry, even in other things. Like these equations are miracles either.
I think someone would ask, why do you want to put God in the equation?
Exactly.
Because like, if the point, like if I will send my kids to school at some day, inshallah, to learn physics. He's not here. To learn physics or chemistry or whatever. The idea of learning this, I mean, I'm sure my parents didn't send me to school because they wanted me to, get to know God. They wanted
Just
me
the
to.
opposite. I don't want to insult anyone or criticize anyone.
Exactly.
But just the opposite.
So
that you will earn money and
so the idea is that at some point, you learn physics because one day you will become an engineer, or you learn biology because someday you'll become a doctor, or chemistry or whatever. So whether you put God in the equation or not, you will reach there at some point if you, learn and follow these equations. And then if the idea of becoming engineers and doctors and whatever is to build like this, advanced and technology and advancements and, to get all this, what we have now, at least in the West, like cars and skyscrapers and the medicine and everything, they didn't need God in the equation, and they were still able to reach all of these
That's
things.
exactly what I'm saying. This is how we see.
Yeah.
And somebody asks you, why do you still believe in God? And you say that, but I have a spiritual connection.
No, I won't say that. Okay.
No, I'm not talking about you, like specifically. But the answer, but why do you believe? Right? I mean, let's not assume that it's cultural thing, because my father was Muslim or Christian and whatever, because I was raised Muslim. At best, we have, this mystical relationship with the reality. We call it spiritual, we call it, I don't know, psychological, we call it feelings, we call it life, because I'm so thankful because I have this life, we say. If this life also, this mystical thing that you have also becomes the matter of equations, then you will not need God there too. So that's the reason most of us, maybe not you, you are an exception, but most of us so afraid when people come with equations or explanations about the so-called mystical aspect of the universe. And the solution is not obviously try to hold there and prevent them bringing some equations. If the equations are there, equations are there. You cannot fight against it. Going back to what Duha said in her anger, the solution will and is that seeing that all these equations or whatever, right, were wrong, even in physics. I'm not saying that the equations are not there. The way they are taught to us, the way we see them, maybe not taught, but we see them, right? It is wrong. the way we interpret them is wrong. And when we have the right interpretation in the light of Quran, the revelation, when it becomes making sense, then we will say, no matter what equation you bring me, it will only increase my iman. But to reach there, it's a long path. So I agree that, people can ask, why do you need God in, let's say, physics or chemistry and so on and so forth? The question is, why do you need God in anywhere else as well? Why? Why do you need God, for instance?
Well, when my atheist friends ask me this, I would say like simply that I don't believe that something could be out of nothing. Like from what we've been studying like the whole time, like you have to ask the initial question, is this existence? Where did it come from? Like at every moment where it's coming from. And nothing, neither of these laws explain, even the Big Bang Theory, if there's an explosion, where did it come from? Or the thing that exploded itself, how was it like something created it? So, I mean, it's as simple as whether there's evolution or not, or whether, I don't know, like someone made this, and this, when you think about it, it makes you believe that this someone is wise, is knowledgeable, knows everything, he's everywhere, like this kind of thing. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. So, like as simple as that, like it's not so deep, spiritual, whatever, like spiritual doesn't work with me. It's more like, I mean, it might sound illogical to someone, but for me, it's very logical to believe that this world did not exist out of nothing. And someone who is like, the almighty, all powerful, all knowledgeable is created it and is creating it at every moment. I mean, that's what we've been learning. And I think I believe in that. I don't know. Like it doesn't, like, that's why when I started about evolution, it didn't, like, that's why it did not affect my iman much, because like, so the idea is, I don't know whether believing like in Adam is something that is what's it called, like one of the pillars, that we have to believe in. Like if you don't believe that Adam is the first human, you're not a Muslim. So I don't know that. So that's why it did not affect my identity or iman as a Muslim, because like I still believe God is creating, and that's I thought that was the point of the discussion. That's why I brought it up. Yeah.
Yusuf? Oh, we have to close today. We will continue, inshallah. Like today, at least, it was good to get these ideas and locate ourselves where we are. Go ahead, please.
So after the last half hour's conversation, especially, I started appreciating Quran starting many verses with "Qul," say this, because really the way we speak is shaping the way we understand. And like it, as in the example of, let's say, I mean, I shouldn't go to serial killers.
No, go ahead, please. I didn't mention this because you would make it better.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a pattern of people dying, and police department comes out and gives us statistics about how regularly people are dying in the city, people will just get fed up and say that, like, people do not die by themselves. But the way you are speaking is as if, well, as a police, what are we supposed to do? They're just dying, and we are here to report you the statistics of that. We would say that, no, you're there. You have a duty of protecting people. Somebody is intentionally killing them. By using this apparently neutral language, you're trying to cleanse yourself, we would say to the police, right? If the police department chief speaks like this. So when it comes to using apparently neutral language, or sometimes not even neutral language, as you said, neuron firing, or electron is pulling or pushing and whatnot, we do make a statement which is shaping our perception as well. So, and we are born in this climate. So even if somebody is not studying, let's say, physics or whatever, like there's lead poisoning. When you rent a house here, especially if you have a child, the landlord has to make the inspection of the house for lead poisoning. because the child living in this environment will be breathing this air and will get poisoned. So nobody is pushing lead or working in the lead and whatnot, but the house is painted with lead paint in 70s, 80s in the United States. So this language is all around us. So even someone who did not go to school and whatnot, we are born in this climate of speech, of this naturalistic approach. And not only for the last 1,000 years, like humanity goes up and down. Whenever revelation comes, revelation is pulling people out of this heedlessness. But eventually we again get inside this apparently neutral, but actually atheist language. So this is why being vigilant about what we are saying or where I am coming from is quite important, because eventually, inshallah, next week maybe or so, because none of the discussion in here is suggesting a solution. Today we were just trying to pinpoint the problem. There will come the question saying that, okay, in the lab we are doing research, so shall we quit doing research? Like, those people are putting effort, they are doing something, they're observing, and Quran is inviting us to observe the universe. So what are you suggesting? Not to observe? Then, inshallah, in the follow-up, we'll need to work on that.
Jazakallah khairan. Let's conclude here. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة.